Yo, it's Jared. Welcome to this video. This is round 4 of the 2017 Doeberl Cup major section, played over the Easter break. And I have the white pieces in this game. My opponent is Aurel-John Buciu, who is a candidate master. And let's see what happened in this game. I opened with e4. He played d5. This is the Scandinavian Defense. Takes. Queen takes. And I played the move knight to f3. The main move, of course, is knight to c3. And black can either play queen to a5 or queen to d8. Also, queen to d6 is possible. But the purpose behind knight to f3 is that white is postponing the development of the knight on b1, because he wants to, at some point, put the pawn up to c4 and then put the knight on c3. So my opponent played bishop to f5. More popular is bishop to g4, but this move is okay. And now I made a bad move. I should play the move knight to c3, which was mentioned to me after the game. And the line will go something like this: queen back to d8, d4, e6. These bishops come off. And in this position, white can play multiple moves. I'm not quite sure which move is best, but there's rook e1, there's bishop f4, there's bishop g5. And white can hope for some type of advantage. But black is fine here. Black has no weaknesses. Instead, I played a pretty bad move. I played d4, and I recognized as soon as he made his next move that I should have played the move bishop e2 first, or of course the line that he mentioned, knight to c3. Of course, the problem with d4, and I only recognized the problem after he made his move, and he made his move really quickly because probably he's had this multiple times before, is queen e4 check, and whoops, that's pretty embarrassing. So I've just lost a pawn on move 4. So, not good. So now I have to try to salvage this position. So that's pretty bad. I played bishop e2. It was also possible just to play bishop e3. I'm not quite sure which is best. Probably they're both about the same, but some line like this gives white a little bit of compensation for the pawn, because white's got lots of pieces out and black has one piece out. But bishop e2 was played, and he grabbed on c2, of course. Castles, trades queens, knight f6, knight c3, and he played c6. So at this moment in the game, it's important that white plays the best move here. If white, for example, plays a move like, I don't know, bishop f4 or bishop g5, black's going to play e6, and white is probably just losing. I mean, I think white should lose here. So it's very important that white plays this next move, d5. White has this weak pawn on d4, and with the move d5, plans to get this pawn off the board. So now white does not have this weakness anymore. Black took with the knight, and I played knight takes d5. At this moment, there's a really nice line which I didn't look at all, which was rook takes d5. Pawn takes d5, knight d5, and white is intending, of course, the big fork on c7. So one line would be king to d7 in order to prevent the white knight from coming to c7. Now knight e5, king e6, and if I go in for the fork right now with knight c7, unfortunately there's just king takes knight, so first bishop f4, and this is supposedly equal. White is going to land the fork on c7 by force. There's not much that black can do about it. For example, knight a6 just runs into bishop takes knight, and then the fork on c7 next. In this position, black can try king takes d5, But after bishop to f3 check, white will take on b7 next, and at the end of the day we'll pick up the rook in the corner with some line like this. This is a very important move though. If you take the rook right away, then you lose a knight on e5. So rook e1 first, and you can't really move the rook on a8 because white's going to move his knight with some massive check. So you trade, and now both black rooks are hanging. f6, bishop d4 check by the rook, and I can finally take the rook on a8, and I have my pawn back, and it should be roughly equal. But of course I'm not going to see any of that. That's quite clear. So after bishop f4, black can also try the move knight to c6, but after the capture on c6, knight c7, and just taking the rook, this position, white attacks the pawn on a7. This knight will come back into the game, and this should be roughly equal. White should be able to get one of the pawns back because they're so weak. But I didn't see these lines, so I just took with a knight. Pawn takes, and I played rook takes d5. Was also possible in this moment to play the move knight to d4, attacking the bishop on f5. The best move seems to be bishop to d7, and then knight to b5, once again going for the fork, not on c8, but on c7, which forces black to take on b5. You can play knight a6, but then rook takes d5 should be fine for white. Capture, knight c6, takes on d5, and simply back to d1. So a sample line from this position might be bishops to c5, bishop f4, rook c8, rook c1, bishop d6, and white is very active. Should be some compensation for the pawn. Instead of bishop to c5, black can also play rook to c8, bishop e3, intending to take on c6 and take on a7, so a6, bishop back, b3, and bishop f3, and white's bishops are so good that the computer gives white full compensation for a pawn. But going back to the game, I took with the rook. He played bishop to e4, and I just went back to d1. So I'm clearly a pawn down and worse, so I'm trying to hold on in this game. It's not fun to play games like this where you make a really bad howler right out of the opening and you lose a pawn and you're just worse long term. So the whole game I was trying not to lose, basically. e6, bishop f4, knight c6, rook c1, bishop e7, knight d2. I wanted to try to get my knight to a better place. Knight e5 was also possible, but knight to c4, rook d8, b3, castles, f3. The idea behind this move is I want to play the knight back and then to grab this bishop on d5, which now would have nowhere to go. So at least for my pawn, I will have the two bishops. Bishop c5 check, knight e3, bishop b6, and king f1 to unpin, intending to capture on d5 next. Knight e7, really nice move. So if I take on d5, which I did, he can now take back with the knight. And I played bishop to d2. So it looks pretty bad. I have the two bishops, which is nice, but I don't know if that really counts for much. My pieces are also actually not particularly active. I have some nice rooks, but my bishops are pretty lame. So bishop e3, of course I can't take this bishop because he will land a fork on e3 and win material. So I played king to e1, rook c8, and I played bishop to f1. I played this move because after taking, I was concerned that my rook and my g2 pawn would be hanging, which seems to be the case. I'm not quite sure about this, so I decided I don't want to allow this. Before taking on e3, I'll make sure g2 is protected. Now he moved back bishop to b6, and I decided to take all the rooks off the board. And I felt like this should help my chances to hold. King f8, bishop to d3, attacking the pawn, but I can't really take it because after bishop d4, if I capture this pawn, black just plays g6, and the next moves will be king g7 and king takes bishop. Bishop to e4, king e7, and I just took this. I thought my chances of holding here would be okay. Maybe not so easy, but at least I'd have more chances to hold if the knight was off the board. King e2, king e6, king d3, bishop c5, bishop d2. All I can do here is wait. So just bishop d2, f5, bishop c1, h5. Some of these moves surprised me a bit, but they seem to be okay. Black seems to be a little bit better. Bishop g5, bishop d6. And now in this position, I wasn't sure if I should play h3 or h4. Looking at it with hindsight, of course, it's actually really, really easy to know which move is right. And it's not the move that I played. I played h4. This is a very bad move. I should play h3, of course, so that my pawn is not constantly under attack by his bishop. h4 is just a really bad move, and we'll see why. He played f4, which is a great move. This prevents my bishop from coming back. So if ever I need to try to protect this pawn and not let the bishops come off the board, I'll need to do some type of maneuver like this, coming all the way around. And sometimes this is not possible. So f4 is a great move. I play king d4, b6, king d3. I can just wait. Bishop e5, bishop d8, and he played the move b5, which was, it's probably not bad, but it's not necessary. He had a win here with the move king to f5, and after bishop e7, bishop f6. This idea pops up a lot in this ending, and he had multiple chances to play this. And I basically need to take on f6 because my h4 pawn's hanging, and this is a very easy win for black. King d4, king e6, and because black has played this move f4, it also means that I can't move my g pawn, which means black has heaps of tempi with his pawns. Black can use all these tempi with his pawns, and I don't have much tempi. So after a while, I'm going to have to move my king back, and the black king will just enter my position and take all my pawns, basically. But he played b5. I played bishop back to g5, and he played king to f5. Rather than bishop to g5, I should have played the move bishop to a5 with the aforementioned idea of bishop to e1 to protect the h4 pawn. Bishop f6, bishop e1. This, I'm not completely sure about this, but this has some chances to hold, I think. But I played bishop g5, king f5. It was better than king f5 to play a move like a6. And the purpose is black is waiting for me to make a move. And then once again, he plays bishop f6. If I take on f6, we get to the same king and pawn ending, which is just losing. So I'll play a move like bishop c7 to attack the f4 pawn, but now just king f5. And black's next move is just bishop takes h4, and I can resign. But king to f5 was played, and I played bishop to d8. And once again, he can play the move bishop to f6 and win rather easily. Instead, he played g6. Again, I played bishop g5, but I should go back to this same plan of bishop a5, intending bishop to e1 this was a better way to hold. Because I always played bishop g5, and I always gave him the option of playing bishop to f6, which once again, he played bishop g7, but once again, he can just play bishop f6 and just win easily. Bishop g7 was played, bishop e7. He played bishop h6. Again, he can play bishop f6, but actually in this exact position, it's not quite as bad as the previous lines, because now after bishop c5, white gains a tempo on the pawn on a7, and after a6 can play bishop f2 and protect the h4 pawn. But bishop h6 was played, king d4, king e6, bishop d8, and bishop f8 was played. It's possible that bishop g7 check is also winning for black. King c5, d4, get the pawn running, bishop a5 to try to keep the pawn from going too far, bishop f6 attacking h4, and this is the problem, my bishop from d2 can't protect on h4 and protect the pawn on d3 from queening. So an example is if I play bishop e1, black can just take this pawn, as after bishop h4 there's d2 and the pawn queens. So I would need to make a move like a4 and hope for some type of counterplay. I could also take on b5, but that probably loses as well. a6, takes. This is a line that the engine offered. Bishop h4. I try to come back and win the d3 pawn. But after g5, this is pretty bad for white. Basically, this position, white will become zugzwanged and will just have no moves. g4. Basically, all white can do is wait. The key moment here, though, comes up king e2, king e6, bishop e1. Basically, white's just waiting, trades, and now the h-pawn runs. So this is the problem. Black has the h-pawn, which can lure the white king away. And after king c4, black just comes in and just takes this pawn, and this pawn runs home as well. So that's a pretty simple win for black. Instead, bishop to f8 was played rather than bishop g7. Bishop g5, bishop d6, bishop d8, a6. Was also possible to play the move bishop e5 check, king c5, a6. Some variation like this offered by the computer. And again, bishop f6 hits this pawn on h4, and once again I can't play bishop to e1 because of bishop takes h4. So a6 was played instead, bishop back to g5, bishop e5, king d3, king d7. Black could have also played king f5, once again going for the same idea of bishop f6. And I think this should win as well. Bishop d8, bishop f6, and once again h4 pawn hangs. So many options black had to play this plan, but for whatever reason he just chose not to play this. But king d7 was played, king d2, b4. This was, I felt, not necessary. King e2, king c6, king d3. And the last chance for black to try to win is here when you play king c6. Better was king e6, and once again trying to run back to f5 and play bishop f6. This same plan again, king d3, king f5, bishop e7. And I can take on b4 now. I looked at this variation. I'm not completely sure if it wins for black. From a practical point of view, it has very good chances to win because the lines are so complicated and so difficult to assess. I take on b4. This is, of course, the problem with playing b4 is that this pawn's hanging. Bishop h4. This is a tough defense for white. I looked at this variation for about half an hour with the engine, and I couldn't come to a complete conclusion if white is holding or if black can win this. g4. I shouldn't take on g4 because then black has very good chances to win with the two pawns. So But this is the key move, king to e2. The black king needs to come back in order after g takes f3, he can recapture with the king on f3 and have a good king position. Bishop d4, b5, king e6, and now the capture, now that the king has moved away, and king d3. And I'm not completely sure, this might hold for white, but it might not. So after king d3, play might continue bishop g7, bishop c7, bishop e5. Of course I can't take on e5 because the king and pawn ending is a very easy win for black. He'll just march the king back and prevent this pawn from queening, and then when my king comes up to take care of this pawn, black will just play pawn to f3. So I keep the bishop on the board. King d6, bishop g1, just waiting. Bishop c5, and I couldn't find a win here for black. Black's run the king all the way over to this side of the board, which kind of shows that maybe there is no plan to win with pushing these pawns. Not sure. I'll need to look at this a bit further. But after king d3, it is also possible for black to ignore the attack on the bishop and play f3. Of course, I should very quickly mention that king takes bishop is not possible due to both f2 and f takes g2 and the pawn queens. So that's pretty simple. So capture, g3. Now this pawn is going to make a home run, so I need to be very quick. b6, g2, b7, bishop a7, and now the only move that seems to hold the draw. This pawn wants the queen, but my pawn also wants the queen. So I have a nice move that prevents black's pawn from queening. Bishop b6. Now this bishop must be captured. Queen. And black also queens. But in this case, it's white to move first, and queen e8 check should lead in some type of perpetual check. Still, not completely sure. Black is up a piece, but I think white should be able to force a draw with a series of checks. So that's what he should have gone for. He should have gone back to e6 and played for bishop to f6 once again. But king c6 was played, king d3, king b5, bishop d8. He played a5, bishop e7, a4, bishop d8, and here in this position we agreed to a draw. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this game, this round 4 game from the Doeberl Cup. Stay tuned for round 5, which we'll be posting very soon. Thanks a lot and have a good day.